Hello, it's on? All right. So we're going to go ahead and transition into our closing keynote. So if everybody could go ahead and please take their seats. So before we go into our closing keynote, a few items. I'd like to ask that attendees remain seated after Linda Darling-Hammond's talk, as we would like to acknowledge all of our sponsors and volunteers. And we'll also be doing the drawing for the winning ticket for those who participated in our school supply drive. And somebody will be leaving with an Xbox. Thank you, Microsoft. So with that, I'd like to introduce the president and CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, Carl Guardino.
Christina Peralta, thank you. I'd like to just take a moment to thank the amazing team at the Leadership Group who put together this substantive, informative, and also fun day. If they could stand as I call them out, Christina Peralta. Now, we have a tradition, and it's not just efficiency, but it's to show the love equally. We clap once, but we make it a really good one. A really good one. So we'll try that again, starting with Christina. So Christina Peralta, well done. David Palter, Margaret Gray, and Paul Escobar, and the rest of the team helping here today. Wonderful. Thank you again for all the work they do. And if you're not aware, at the Leadership Group, we try to add a proactive, positive difference in our education agenda through public policies at the regional, state, and federal level, through programs and projects as well that can be brought to scale. Many of you have joined us for our Young Women's Summits. This year it brought together more than 400 middle school young women and 150 rising stars and executives and elected leaders, women, so that they could interact with people that look like them and know that there is a path forward, especially in STEM. Our Young Men's Leadership Summit aims to do similar, and that will be later this year. Christina, the date, because I know everyone wants to save it. December 7th or the 8th. You just save both days. In addition, last year, we rolled out in a beta test for underserved middle schools in partnership with our friends at the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, what we lovingly call STEM with Mayor Sam, where Mayor Liccardo comes out with executives from our companies, Silicon Valley Education Foundation leaders, and ourselves to make sure that not only students, but parents know the importance of success by 7th and 8th grade in algebra. And then we send those students to that wonderful program that the Silicon Valley Education Foundation has for about 17 days of intense summer school around algebra. So Mohammed Chaudhry, thank you for partnering with us to work with your great team on that important effort. You can clap once for that too. And then, because when I was in school, my best class was recess. We can't forget that a healthy mind usually also requires a healthy body. And that means our kids have physical activity and nutritious meals. And that's why for the past 3 years, thanks to the leadership of Lamb Research and others, we've had our Heart and Souls 5K Salad Bars for Schools initiative, with an initial goal of salad bars in 30 schools. After just 3 years, we've placed salad bars in 192 schools, serving 125,000 primarily underserved kids. Yeah, that one deserved more than that, but we're just going to go with that. And our policy work through our great team that Christina so capably leads includes math misplacement, transitional kindergarten that we were able to protect and continue this year, computer science, access, and of course working on the teacher shortage issues that we face throughout California. So thank you for joining us today and partnering throughout the year on this fundamental foundation issue of education on which Silicon Valley depends. I would not be, however, representing the leadership group well if I didn't tell you where you need to be on Thanksgiving morning, November 24th. Where are you going to be? Not bad. 4 of you had the right answer. This will be our 12th annual Applied Materials Silicon Valley Turkey Trot for health, hope, and a home, to make sure that we provide everyone with healthy meals and health access, that they have shelter above their heads, and that they have the basic essentials that we take for granted so often. So join us, because our ambitious goal this year is 28,000 of our closest friends, which will allow us to give away 1 million to 5 local nonprofits who help needy families here in our region. So, Thanksgiving morning, Silicon Valley Turkey Trot. You may know that I'm on leave right now from the leadership group, a 100-day leave, so that we can deal with another issue that I understand some of you grappled with this morning. There's a rumor that traffic is back in Silicon Valley, and that if something is going to be done about it, it's going to be by us, collectively, private and public sector citizens who care about the future of this valley's quality of life and its economic health. So, in 74 days and a wake-up call, we will all vote and determine whether we once again want to take our fate into our own hands to tax ourselves with a half-cent sales tax for 30 years for 6 key improvements that work like a jigsaw puzzle to come together. First, to finish the job of bringing BART to downtown San Jose and on to Santa Clara. Second, to connect that BART extension with platform-to-platform transfers in downtown San Jose and Santa Clara with an electrified Caltrain system, so that we finally have rapid rail around the entire Bay Area. Third, that we never leave anyone behind and make sure that we continue to have Lifeline service and core bus service for seniors, the disabled, the working poor, and students. And that we finally add the transit line in the medium of Highway 85, as we had always set out to do when we saved the median for that purpose when we built Highway 85. Fourth, that we get people out of 4 wheels and onto 2 wheels or 2 feet by having a $250 million emphasis on bike and ped improvements, especially near schools. Fifth, that we fix the interchanges on our highway system, including the one right here. It's included at 101 and Shoreline. See, that got you motivated from this morning, as well as key improvements on the 8 expressways in our county expressway system. And finally, sixth, the conditions of our local streets and roads, with $1.2 billion for street maintenance and pothole repair. So consider on balance Measure B whether you think that's a worthy investment deserving your vote in November. I am so pleased to get to provide the short introduction of someone I have long admired and that the leadership group has long depended upon her research and analysis to do our work. She is not solely a leader on the regional or state, but also the national and international scale. In 2008, she helped a wonderful young president-to-be with his education transition team work. I'm sure I was second on the list, but they never called. She's the president and CEO of the Learning Policy Institute and the Charles E. Ducommun Professor of Education Emeritus at Stanford University. There are several words in that sentence I can't even spell. She founded the Stanford Center for Opportunity Policy and Education. She served as the faculty sponsor of the Stanford Teacher Education Program, which she also helped to redesign. Now, my team told me people would rather hear from our keynote than hear about our keynote. So with that, we'll set aside the many richly deserved accolades and honors of our keynote today. But I hope you will join me in learning from and welcoming to the podium our keynote speaker today, Linda Darling-Hammond.
Thank you. Let me see. Whoops. I'm already ahead of myself. So I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about the themes that actually have already been in this conference over the last few hours this morning. The 21st century and its learning, what will it take to get there in California? And I put it that way because Silicon Valley is leading what people would think of as progress in the 21st century in science and technology and engineering, in new ideas and new ways to think about who we are and how we live. And our education system is coming out of an era which is causing it to need to catch up very rapidly. And we've heard about some of those efforts today, but we have to accelerate the process of change in our education system if we are going to really arrive fully at what this century requires of us and our children. As you know, the demand for skills is changing. There's been a huge increase in the demand for sort of complex communication and expert thinking skills. There's been a decline in routine, manual, and cognitive skills. Basically, those are being digitized and outsourced and automated, those other kinds of jobs. And yet the challenge for schools is that the skills that are most easily taught and tested are the same ones that are most easily digitized and outsourced. And we are trying to come out of that era, but we still have quite a long way to go. If we think about the purposes of schooling, they really have to respond to the era in which they exist. The idea of schooling in the Middle Ages was really about just transmitting the word of the Bible or of the church. In the industrial age, we were trying to get people to basically do the same thing over and over again in assembly lines, in industrial factories and mills, and on farms. And now we're in an era where the demands of schools are to prepare young people who are motivated and self-reliant citizens, risk-taking entrepreneurs, as we see here in Silicon Valley, converging and continuously changing professions because the nature of knowledge is changing so quickly. All over the world, the expectations for learning are changing. This list is familiar to anyone who's in education. The ability to communicate and work in teams and be adaptable and solve problems, et cetera, across specialist lines. If you look at the bottom, this comes from a presentation by the deputy minister at the time in Hong Kong, and the name of his presentation was Mathematics in Hong Kong, China, Improving on Being First in PISA. That gives you a little bit of the sense of the competitiveness around the world in changing education systems. And the changes that have occurred in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in much of China, China is just getting moving extraordinarily in catching up in education. But in many other places as well, have been really quite extraordinary. And we are way, way behind on the agenda of developing the kind of education that allows kids to problem solve, think critically, and work in the current age. And of course, the expectations for teaching are also changing, and this is just a quick reminder of what that means. Let's see if it will work. Nope, we're going to have to ask Leanna, who is going to make that work.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised or lowered tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government? Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
And so did the kids. So we laugh at this, but this idea about teaching, that it's a smart person who knows their content area and can say it out loud to kids, has actually informed a lot of our education policy for a long time. And we know that it's not enough to be a smart person who knows your content area. He does know the Hawley Smoot Tariff Act and say it out loud to kids in order to get learning to result. But we still have had a huge task to do to change the expectations for how we bring people into the profession, how we train them, what we enable them to do in schools. And of course, we've got this change in the nature of the skills. In 1970, the top skills demanded by Fortune 500 companies were reading, writing, and arithmetic, basically. At the turn of the century, the top skills were teamwork, problem solving, interpersonal skills, and oral communications. Reading and writing and arithmetic were still there, but they were further down the list. And these skills, which are hard to develop if you're basically prepping for multiple choice tests, are the ones that are really in greatest demand. Knowledge is growing extraordinarily rapidly. And as a Stanford professor, I don't usually like to quote people from Cal Berkeley. And I'm sure Cal is in the room. You can clap once. And now we'll take the Stanford clap. All right. They can't follow directions, but that's all right. So these Cal Berkeley professors, I have to acknowledge, have done this amazing research where they're evaluating the growth of knowledge in the world. And they discovered that between 1999 and 2003, there was more new knowledge in the world created than in the entire history of the world preceding. Think about that for a minute. In those 4 years, and it's accelerating. So there's more technology knowledge. The technology knowledge is actually doubling about every 11 months. It'll probably be every 10 months by the time I finish this talk. And what that means is that we can't think about schooling as taking the curriculum and dividing up into the facts you need to know, spreading it across 12 years of schooling, asking kids to memorize it, and spit it back, and then they'll be done. Because in fact, our kids are going to have to work with knowledge that hasn't been discovered yet, using technologies that haven't been invented yet, solving big problems that we have not yet managed to solve, to sustain our planet, to resolve conflict, to handle climate change, not to mention traffic on 101. All of those things are the challenges for our kids. And if you go to Google up the street, not too far away, they don't look, when they try to evaluate you for a job, at your test scores and your grades. They used to do that, collected all those data, did big studies to see how it predicted success in Google. And the answer was it didn't predict performance at all. So what they try to do is figure out what your learning ability is. And your learning ability is the ability to take a problem, find the information yourself, figure out what's relevant, put it together with other information, work with other people to design solutions, test them out, redefine and refine them, so that you can move forward with new ideas, new products, new solutions. That's really the challenge for our schools. And we are making headway in that direction, but we have a long way to go. The Singapore education minister put it this way, as they were reforming schools in Singapore. The goal is less dependence on rote learning, repetitive tests, and a one-size-fits-all type of instruction, and more on engaged learning, discovery through experiences, differentiated teaching, the learning of lifelong skills, the building of character through innovative and effective teaching approaches and strategies. And that's really the mission. We have a lot of teachers and a lot of school leaders who are very excited to take on this mission. We have a state board and a State Department that is pushing us in this general direction. But we have a long way to go. You look at the PISA results, the U.S. outcomes and international perspectives, you can see that over recent years we have been falling behind. The U.S. is 21st in reading, 32nd in mathematics, 23rd in science, behind many other countries. Little Singapore is up there at the top, a country that had virtually no education system in 1965. when it became independent and has built that system over the last 50 years, over the last dozen years or more. During the No Child Left Behind era, we actually declined in reading, math, and science on PISA. So for all the testing we did, for all the sanctions and consequences we applied to test scores, we are not the best test takers in the world. We have actually fallen backwards because PISA is measuring more open-ended responses and thinking skills than the tests that we've been drilling on. And by the way, we've also had greater child poverty. We've fallen backward in social service. Our safety net is tattered. And we've asked the schools to do it all by themselves. Furthermore, California scores below the U.S. average and has been for many years near the bottom as we also decreased our funding. So the challenges, child poverty, school funding and supports, curriculum focused on low-level skills in response to low-level tests, the elimination of real science in many schools. This is a huge issue for California. During the NCLB era, elementary schools, in many cases, just dropped science in the grades where it wasn't tested. Where there were high stakes put on reading and math in the format of those tests, other subjects disappeared. To the extent that we taught science, it was geared to the small number of tests we had in science, which again were multiple choice tests, and not to doing science. In fact, there was a ceiling on the amount of inquiry science allowed under the old standards in California. Only 10% of your science teaching could have to do with inquiry or investigation. The rest had to do with memorizing the science facts that were in the curriculum. At one point, leaders from Silicon Valley, from businesses, from universities, went to the state board a few years back. This is before the current board that we have, but in the previous board, and said, you're killing science in this state. You got to let us do science in classrooms. And that ceiling raised a little tiny bit. But we have to build science teaching across the entire state. We have years and years and years of basically squeezing out the kind of learning that kids most need for the kind of business that most occurs in Silicon Valley. We have large and growing teacher shortages, especially in math, science, and technology, and inadequate opportunities for educator training in these new challenging pedagogies. We do have some, and the Silicon Valley business community and education community have been responsible for starting those that exist, but we need a lot more. We need to be expansive in our thinking about how we're going to meet these challenges. So by 2010, I'm giving you history. California was one of the lowest spending states in the country, one of the most unequally resourced and segregated states for students. We were the 5th most segregated state. We are still 50th in our ratios of pupils to teachers, administrators, and counselors, in the bottom decile in student achievement, and we were committed to these old industrial age standards. And in 2011, as you know, the changes began with the election of Governor Jerry Brown, Mike Hurst as the chair of the state board, Tom Torlakson as state superintendent, Bill Honig coming back to work on the instructional standards committee. Mike sometimes calls this the rise of the septuagenarians, and I think what we have gotten as productive reform in this era has been the result of the experience and the wisdom that this team has, and the fact that almost everyone here has lived through both the glory days of California in the past, the very large decline, and a commitment to resolve those problems and move us forward. So California is now on a new path. We know there's more equitable funding, new accountability strategies, new standards and assessments in math, science, English language arts, a new approach to governance, but we do have this very long way to go. And so if you looked at the headlines in fall 2015, and this is beginning to be the headlines in 2016 as well, we got all of these indicators of teacher shortages. And let me say that all of the reforms succeed that we've been undertaking only if we have very well-trained, very well-supported teachers in all classrooms, in all communities to implement the reforms. And we're in grave danger. As chair of the California Teacher Credentialing Commission, I can tell you that last year, a third of the credentials or permits we issued were for substandard credentials, that is, people who were not trained And the greatest increase was in waivers and temporary permits for people who had no training at all and were not involved in any program. And that's going to happen again this year, and it's going to happen again for years to come because demand's on the increase, and we've seen this kind of a decrease in teacher preparation enrollments in the state, down 76% over the last decade. They're beginning to inch upward, about 2% increase last year. We have a long way to go to make teachers feel, to make individuals feel like this is a profession to enter the state of California that will be well supported, well compensated, for which they'll be well prepared. The better prepared teachers are, the more likely they are to stay, the better supported they are in induction, the more likely they are to stay. All of those things have begun to crumble in this state and need to be rebuilt. Underprepared teachers are on the rise, as I just said. And in math and science, what we have is a decline in the number of people going in and getting credentialed, an increase in the number that are coming in without preparation, and a lot of courses that can't be taught, classrooms that are much too large, substitutes who are coming into those classes because we don't have enough people to fill those positions. I was on the phone Monday with somebody from the Fresno School District just talking about the fact that they started school with 50 vacancies that they hadn't been able to fill, most of them in math, science, and special ed, and we'll hear that from districts all across the state. So we have to both handle those things and bring science back to California. I've already talked about the fact that science has disappeared in California to a substantial extent, except in wealthy districts that have had the resources, the basic aid districts that have been able to keep those resources in play. But let's look at what science looks like around the world. In Singapore, when you're in high school, you have an examination system. And in the examination system, in every science class, as part of the assessment, the students basically identify a problem, design their investigation, conduct it, collect the evidence, analyze it, and write it up. It looks like a small science journal article. I've seen them. Teachers score these as part of the examination system with moderation to be consistent. The same thing is going on in Australia, in Great Britain, in Hong Kong, and you can go around the world as to what assessments look like tied to an investigatory curriculum in science. Here's our 10th grade California science test. And this is the released items that are being given right now. This asks a prediction was made. The best conditions for earthworm growth occur when there's fewer than 5 earthworms per cubic meter of soil. The prediction is called a... All right, C, you got it. Does that mean you can do it, design and conduct and manage an experiment and collect the data and write it up? I don't think so, but that passes for the evaluation of inquiry in California science testing. Here's another one. Which of the following organelles use carbon dioxide to produce sugars? Anybody remember the answer? How many think it's A? Clap once. How many think it's B? Clap once. We've got a couple. C? D? Okay, so we have a diversity of a view about who remembers the following words. But if you knew the answer to that, would that enable you to do the kind of inquiry science that we just talked about? No, it just means that you happen to have the right Velcro for that particular fact in your brain. So that's how we've been testing science, and that means that's how we've been teaching science. You can talk amongst yourselves. The question is, will we choose A, this approach to education, cramming for the kinds of tests we've had in the past, or B, this kind of science where kids are actually engaged in science? And that's really a huge question for our future. So opportunities for public and private partnership. I've got 3 major things I want you to walk away with. One is, how do we think about investing in teachers, teaching, and technology? Again, many of these kinds of activities are going on with private and public investment together, but we have to worry about candidate training. We're going to need to bring people into these fields, math, science, technology, also English learner teaching and special education. We're going to need forgivable loans and service scholarships, which have worked very well in other context, other states, North Carolina, South Carolina, that's how they built the research triangle. Build people in and say, if you will teach, we will pay for your education. And in return, you will give us 3, 4, 5 years of service. By the time teachers have gotten through that many years, they typically stay because they've gotten over the hump and they've learned how wonderful it is to be a teacher. Housing support's hugely important in Silicon Valley for teachers. Can you afford to live here if you can afford to take a job? Teacher residencies, where teachers in hard-to-staff school districts are recruited. Their training is paid for. They study under the very best teachers. They get their master's degree in a full year, and they give time and service back to the district. San Francisco is bringing most of its math and science teachers in through its teacher residency program. High-quality professional development around the curriculum, around teaching diverse learners, around teaching with technology. We can put technology into schools, but we know that it takes more than that to help teachers learn to use the technology. And internships with industry, so you can actually engage in the work, the science, the technology, the engineering, and bring that back from work that you've done in the summertime. The second area is supporting curriculum and assessments. Industry and private corporations and philanthropists can help support partnerships with linked learning academies, where we actually bring kids into science, technology, engineering, mathematics fields by doing the work that applies their academic learning to the work of industries, whether it's a health sciences academy, whether it's construction trades academy, where kids are doing everything from architecture and engineering to actually engaging in the construction. What we see across the state is that kids who come through these academies are graduating at high rates. Most of them are going on to college, and they are excited about their learning because they're using what they know in real-life contexts. We need to replant inquiry-based science. Synopsys talked earlier about how they're sponsoring science fairs. Very important. That needs to be part of what every kid experiences every year in science, in the classroom, as well as in co-curricular opportunities, robotics clubs, you name it. We are going to have to do a lot to bring inquiry-based science back. We're going to need authentic assessment of the new standards. In the panel I saw here just a few minutes ago, Carrie Hanel from Ed Trust West pointed out that we have an opportunity with new standards and new assessments to do something serious about science assessment, where kids are engaged in investigation and inquiry. We have that opportunity. Will we take it? That's a giant question mark. We need to rethink A through G. We have to put the TE in STEM because, in fact, the A through G curriculum was an outgrowth of the Committee of 10 in 1892, true fact, which decided what the high school curriculum should be in the country. And it had certain ideas about science, biology, chemistry, physics, in that order alphabetically. It had certain ideas about math, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, in that order alphabetically is how it got rolled out across the country. Now the way in which people learn science and math all around the world has changed with interdisciplinary approaches, with technology, with engineering. Our kids don't get technology and engineering in the US or in California especially because it's not counted as math or science in A through G. We got to take that on and create a way of imagining what the curriculum should be for the 21st century, because we're holding our schools back with a framework that's 100 years old. And finally, as you have identified as the key theme here, addressing inequalities, we need to help support access all over the communities in Silicon Valley that don't have the resources for technology tools. As you know, that means bandwidth as well as tools so that kids can actually be online and use them for multiple purposes. Science equipment is missing from a lot of schools. Science labs are missing. Engineering opportunities in all of our schools. Kids love engineering. They love to make things and do things and fix things and figure out how things work. Generally absent from the school curriculum. Summer learning is very important. If you look at the difference in achievement for ninth graders, rich and poor, at that moment in time, a third of it was a function of before kindergarten, of the gap that occurs before kindergarten. 2/3 is a function of summer learning loss. We could do something about that summer learning loss. And in fact, we are doing something. Silicon Valley Education Foundation has this wonderful program around algebra in the summer. There are many other things. Every one of our kids should have the opportunity to be engaged in enriching, engaging work that addresses this agenda in the summer. It was that way when I grew up in the 60s and 70s. We had a lot of federal programs that provided it. Those are gone. We're going to need public and private partnerships to be sure that that happens for all of our kids. Mentors, internships are other ways. If we think about the costs of inequality, the non-provision of these opportunities to so many of our kids, particularly along the 101 corridor here in Silicon Valley, the costs are enormous. My Stanford colleague, Rick Hanushek, did these calculations that were in the Equity and Excellence Commission report. If Hispanic and African American student performance grew to be comparable to white performance and remained there over the next 80 years, the impact would add some $50 trillion in present value terms to our economy, more than 3 times the size of our current GDP. And this represents the income we forego by not engaging in equity for all of our students. And although the local control funding formula is helping us begin to equalize, we still have enormous gaps in the resources and opportunities that are available to kids. So to sum up, I think the point of this conference and the point of the work you're doing is what John Dewey, who plagiarized every idea I ever had before I had it, pointed out many years ago, which is that what the best and wisest parent wants for his or her child, that must the community want for all of its children. Any other goal is narrow and unlovely. Acted upon, it destroys our democracy. I think in this work that you are doing in your roles as educators and as private collaborators with the education system, we're really building what the best and wisest parent wants for his or her child, for all of our children. And California's future depends on our shared commitment to that goal. Thank you. I don't know if we're trying to do any questions or answers or if we're all done. 3 questions. Okay, we can take 3 questions.
So
Okay.
I'm highly persuaded by your presentation, and it seems like there's a disconnect between what you've just said and what college applications ask for.
Mm-hmm.
So can you...
Yes. Well, it's interesting, you know, 850 plus colleges, close to 900 colleges now, have made test scores optional for college admissions. And many of them are trying to figure out how to accept evidence of student work and accomplishments in new ways into the admissions process. MIT is one of the places that has called for students to submit portfolios of their work. There are across California a lot of schools that actually have kids engage in performance assessments, competency-based assessments, which they put in a portfolio that they'd like to be able to share with colleges and universities. Mostly, they have kids do science investigations and social science research projects and literary analyses and mathematical models and so on, and then defend it to a standard and pass it on. And we have some evidence from schools that have been doing this for 20 years that their graduates, and most of these are urban schools serving predominantly students of color, low-income students, and new immigrants, not only go to college at higher rates, but they stay in college at rates almost twice as high as the average American student. And the reason is that they're doing the work that actually prepares them for what college is going to demand, which most of the indicators of what colleges ask for don't actually measure very well. So we do have this divide. I think there's a lot of energy right now about could we figure out how to get, in addition to the Common App, which is one way that students apply, a common app, an app that would actually be a digital portfolio platform where kids could organize their work and colleges and universities could take 15 minutes and see the top view with grades and badges and a video of the child and, you know, defending a piece of work But also then a table of contents and say, gee, I'd really like to see what you did in that science investigation. Or you've applied for our art program. Let me look at your artwork. So there are efforts like that underway, but we really do need to move forward on a 21st century conception. In California, this means rethinking A through G. As I mentioned before, it means figuring out how in applications we can get evidence of students' accomplishments in addition to their grades and the traditional things that are checked off. The smarter balanced assessments are better in predicting, I think they'll be better in predicting, they're better in measuring the applications of knowledge for research, for example, their performance tasks. But we're going to need to really rethink that whole agenda. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, she's doing that. You go ahead.
Thank you. Your conversation spurred a radical thought. There are a lot of us middle-aged folks, I'll use the term gently, who have either decided they want to go into different professions or have retired early. What about a program to fast-track people like myself who would love to get back into the classroom and teach?
There are many in California. California thrives on these kinds of programs. So if you're interested in teaching, you can do it by either finding one of the 20 residency programs that exist around the state, where you basically spend a year under the wing of a great teacher while you get your credential fully paid for while you earn a salary, and then move on into the profession. You can come through an internship model. There are many, many programs like that across the state. And then there are lots of, in fact, California has post-baccalaureate teacher credentialing, which is unusual. Most states, it's undergraduate. You got to go back and start all over. So we have, even at Stanford, we have lots of people who come in who are mid-career people who come from Silicon Valley and go on, spend a year, and go on into their next occupation. So there are lots of ways to do it. And we just got funding for a sort of teacher recruitment center in California that will soon be online, where you can go in and see all the different places and pathways that are available.
I think that information needs to get down to the districts. Thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome, and I'll take that. Who's choosing the people with questions? Should I do it or somebody else doing it? Okay. I can do it with this guy over here. And then we'll come over here.
You said about the A through G and the changing of the relevance of science and that. Now, to me, the new generation science standards are more going down the road of what you said science should be.
They are.
But what can communities like the community here, the community educated, what can they do to put influence on, I know, whoever runs the A2G now, to get some pressure there to change in accordance with the NGSS, et cetera?
To change the A through G? Yeah. Well, all those people who said they were from Cal, the University of California system is kind of the arbiter of A through G, and there's a committee called the Boers Committee that kind of decides what will be counted. There are two possibilities. One is that all of the University of California alumni in this room will write to the Boers Committee and say, hey, let's really think about what is demanded in this world today, or the way in which schools behave will change and put the pressure on. I think it's probably easier to start with the committee itself, but I think that's part of the process that has to go on. I know we're fomenting revolution here, but I think that's our job, isn't it? This young lady right here. Yes.
With the interdisciplinary focus that's brought up through the trends with schools and colleges being separated into arts and sciences, engineering and business, are there initiatives that are supporting interdisciplinary approaches to teaching students to close the knowledge gap between academics and workplace skills?
Yes. In a word, but maybe I'll say more than just yes. I mentioned the linked learning academies. That's one approach. There are many others where schools are really thinking about how do you organize the knowledge, which often means being interdisciplinary so that you can solve real problems with it. There are schools that have also created interdisciplinary planning and coursework where, humanities teachers may plan and teach the curriculum that's blended together, science and math, sometimes even beyond that. Schools need to be organized so that teachers can plan interdisciplinary curriculum together. Of course, elementary schools can do it more easily right there in the classroom, and some do. The thing we have to do if we want more of that kind of interdisciplinary teaching to be encouraged is be sure that the way in which we check the boxes for what kids have accomplished, whether it's in college admissions, to your question, or in testing, allow for that mode of thinking. Again, this is something that's happening in Singapore, in the International Baccalaureate program. They have specifically planted interdisciplinary work and projects for that purpose. The advanced placement system now has a senior seminar, which is entirely interdisciplinary. It's all authentic work and assessment. Teachers are trained to score it in the way that we described. Huge demand for this course, more than they can keep up with. So there are elements of this, but we need it to become more the norm rather than the exception. Right in front of you is a person who had her hand up. And then, is there somebody over here too? Over there? Okay. We're running over.
So I'm hoping you could dispel the sort of fear that a few of my friend mentioned to me over this weekend. So she is from the East Coast, so educated under elementary at East Coast in Baltimore. I grew up here, San Francisco, born and raised Cal. So public schools, knowing how great the public schools were previously, and what a good foundational education I really did receive. So the myth is this, so that I'm hoping you're going to dispel. There's still value placed on that foundational education, right, with the reading and the basic math and the basics, because her fear is that what she's seeing with her own students in her school, in the school right now, is that they sort of gloss over facts and memorization, which I get what you're talking about, right, the value, not just the multiple choice tests, but there is a value in memorizing information, but not knowing information.
Yeah, so information doesn't disappear, is your question. And all great teachers, we often have these curriculum wars in the United States, where it's like, are we going to do phonics or whole language? Are we going to do, math facts or deeper understanding? All great teachers do both, right? It's not an either or. And part of our problem is that we go from one end of the pendulum to the other end of the pendulum. But we do have to teach, and here's a good example in math. If we teach kids to memorize math facts without deeply understanding what the content of the mathematics means, what we see is that they may do okay on the test through about third or fourth grade, and then they tank after that because it doesn't make any sense to them. They don't really know, they don't have quantitative reasoning. So we have to teach the facts in ways that promote understanding. So the kids are working with the ideas, whether it's in math or whether it's in reading or wherever it is, so that they're deeply understanding what they're doing. Because at the end of the day, the deeper understanding is what's going to carry them into this rapidly changing world that they're going into. And they need those concepts and facts with them, but they can't get there by just having memorized to spit them back. 90% of what we learn in that way, that we take in simply to spit back without context or application, disappears for us. And we need 100% of what we learn to be available to us throughout life. Good place to end. Thank you.
All right, so before you leave, I also wanted to thank some people and some companies that made this event possible, and then we'll find out who won the Xbox. So if you could please stay seated. We're also going to implement the one clap rule. So I'd like to thank our generous sponsors, Microsoft, Salesforce, Chabot Las Positas Community College District, Adobe, Synopsys, Symantec, Infinera, Virgin America, Gilead, Applied Materials, BD Biosciences, Block Construction, Echelon, KQED, Palo Alto University, Proofpoint Systems, San Jose State University, Synex, TechCU, and University of Phoenix. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the Microsoft staff, Jonathan Noble, Vicki Chan. We can clap for them. Jonathan Noble, Vicki Chan, Amanda Poors, our AV staff, Tim, Felix, Anthony, and our amazing planning team, Margaret, Paul, David, Liana, SVLG staff, Carl, Darlene, Angelica, Charles, Don, Lauren, Michael, Mike, Megan, Peter, Raphael, and Ashley. And I'm done. And now we're going to see who's going to win the Xbox. Thank you again to all of those who donated school supplies also to the Family Giving Tree. That's it.
Okay, we're going to make one of you really happy and everyone else really mad at me. So therefore, I'm going to ask Linda Darling-Hammond to pick the winner. Why don't we read the last four numbers?
All right, I think I have a name on it too. Can
Why
I
don't we
say
read
the name?
First name.
Carolyn Abelar. EBMUD.
Yes, must be present to win, right here. Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. That concludes our program. See you next year.